I am asked to talk to you about the great unknown of World War II, the Waffen SS. It is somewhat amazing that the organization which was both political and military, and which during World War II united more than 1 million fighting volunteers, should still be officially ignored. Why is it that the official record still virtually ignores this extraordinary army of volunteers, an army which was at the vortex of the most gigantic struggle affecting the entire world? The answer may well be found in the fact that the most striking feature of the Waffen SS was that it was composed of volunteers from some 30 different countries. What cause gathered them, and why did they volunteer their lives? Was it a German phenomenon? At the beginning, yes. Initially, the Waffen SS amounted to less than 200 members. It grew consistently until 1940, when it evolved into a second phase, the Germanic Waffen SS. In addition to Germans from Germany, Northwestern Europeans, descendants of Germans from all across Europe, enlisted. Then in 1941, during the Great Clash with the Soviet Union, rose the European Waffen SS. Young men from the most distant countries fought together on the Russian front. No one knew anything about the Waffen SS for most of the years preceding the war. The Germans themselves took some time to recognize the distinctiveness of the Waffen SS. Hitler rose to the chancellorship democratically, winning at the ballot box. He ran electoral campaigns like any other politician. He addressed meetings, advertised on billboards. His message attracted capacity audiences. More and more people liked what he had to say, and more people voted members of his party into Congress. Hitler did not come to power by force, but was duly elected by the people and duly installed as chancellor by the President of Germany, General von Hindenburg. His government was legitimate and democratic. In fact, only 2 of his followers were included in the cabinet. Later, he succeeded always through the electoral process in increasing his majority. When some elections gave him up to 90% of the vote, Hitler earned every vote on his own merit. During his campaigns, Hitler faced formidable enemies. The power establishment, who had no qualms whatsoever in tampering with the electoral process. He had to face the Weimar establishment and its well-financed left-wing and liberal parties, and highly organized bloc of 6 million Communist Party members. Only the most fearless and relentless struggle to convince people to vote for him enabled Hitler to obtain a democratic majority. In those days, the Waffen SS was not even a factor. There was, of course, the SA with some 3 million men. They were rank-and-file members of the National Socialist Workers' Party, but certainly not an army. Their main function was to protect party candidates from communist violence. And the violence was murderous indeed. More than 500 National Socialists were murdered by the communists. Thousands were grievously injured. The SA was a volunteer, non-government organization, and as soon as Hitler rose to power, he could no longer avail himself of its help. He had to work within the system he was elected to serve. He came in a state of disadvantage. He had to contend with an entrenched bureaucracy appointed by the old regime. In fact, when the war started in 1939, 70% of German bureaucrats had been appointed by the old regime and did not belong to Hitler's party. Hitler could not count on the support of the church hierarchy. Both big business and the Communist Party were totally hostile to his programs. On top of all this, extreme poverty existed, and 6 million workers were unemployed. No country in Europe had ever known so many people to be out of work. So here is a man quite isolated. 3 million SA party members are not in the government. They vote and help win the elections, but they cannot supplant an entrenched bureaucracy in the government posts. The SA also was unable to exert influence on the army, because the top brass, fearful of competition, was hostile to the SA. This hostility reached such a point that Hitler was faced with a wrenching dilemma: what to do with the millions of followers who helped him to power. He could not abandon them. The army was a highly organized power structure. Although only numbering 100,000 as dictated by the Treaty of Versailles, it exerted great influence in the affairs of state. The president of Germany was Field Marshal von Hindenburg. The army was a privileged caste. Almost all the officers belonged to the upper classes of society. It was impossible for Hitler to take on the powerful army frontally. Hitler was elected democratically, and he could not do what Stalin did, to have firing squads execute the entire military establishment. Stalin killed 30,000 high-ranking officers. That was Stalin's way, to make room for his own trusted commissars. Such drastic methods could not occur in Germany, and unlike Stalin, Hitler was surrounded by international enemies. His election had provoked international rage. He had gone to the voters directly, without the intermediary of the establishment parties. His party platform included an appeal for racial purity in Germany, as well as a return of power to the people. Such tenets so infuriated world Jewry that in 1933 it officially declared war on Germany. Contrary to what one is told, Hitler had limited power and was quite alone. How this man ever survived these early years defy comprehension. Only the fact that Hitler was an exceptional genius explains his survival against all odds. Abroad and at home, Hitler had to bend over backwards just to demonstrate his goodwill. But despite all his efforts, Hitler was gradually being driven into a corner. The feud between the SA and the army was coming to a head. His old comrade, Ernst Röhm, chief of the SA, wanted to follow Stalin's example and physically eliminate the army brass. The showdown resulted in the death of Röhm, either by suicide or murder, and many of his assistants, with the army picking up the pieces and putting the SA back in its place. At this time, the only SS to be found in Germany were in Chancellor Hitler's personal guard.